ancient Hebrew love poetry, which at times is just plain awkward. I mean, twins of a gazelle. What do you do with that? Well, Song of Songs has had a convoluted history of interpretation. Throughout most of church history, the literal interpretation of the poem as depicting the love between a man and a woman, completely out of the question. Jerome, for instance, in the early 400s said, although the book is written in fleshly words, it is a marriage song of a spiritual bride, he said. And to not understand this, one would suffer from it, suffer from the reading of this song. Well, long before Jerome, Jewish commentators said that this book was an allegory for the love between Yahweh and his nation of Israel. And some of these early Jewish commentators would go so far as to look for correspondence between the cycles of seeking and finding throughout the Song of Songs and Israel's up and down relationship with Yahweh. So at the beginning of the song, the first line is, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth," she says. And some of these ancient Jewish commentators would say that every kiss was another law that God gave Israel at Mount Sinai. That was the deliverance of the law was the kisses from Yahweh. 613 kisses. That's a lot of kisses. And then on from there, they would see the first dream sequence when the lovers are separated from one another. That's when that depicts the period of the judges when everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and there was no king in Israel. But then here, Solomon's wedding, well, that's the high point of Israel's history with the Davidic monarchy and Solomon after that. But then things get really bad again. Now, all of that is a bit tenuous, in my opinion. But what they do have going for them is the consistent language throughout the Hebrew Bible describing Israel as being married to Yahweh. And then whenever Israel commits idolatry, it's described as spiritual adultery. You can look at Ezekiel 16 and 23, Hosea 1, Hosea 3. All those texts kind of make that case. I don't know if we can infer from those other texts whether that's what's going on here in this book. But the Christian commentators, Christian thinkers, they took this concept and they ran with it. But they specified it and said, no. What's going on here is it is a love song between Christ and his church. I mean, I was introduced to that in Sunday school. I don't know if you would recognize this song. He brought me to his banqueting table. His banner over me is love. He brought me. I mean, that's taken right out of Song of Songs. And then doesn't Ephesians 5 make that point explicitly, where it compares the love relationship between a husband and a wife to the relationship between Christ and the church? And isn't it strengthened by what Revelation says, describing the New Jerusalem as a bride for Christ, the husband? So that all makes a good bit of sense. There is some truth to that, especially when one considers that all of creation points and depicts the glory of God, but the marriage relationship in particular is a picture of God's love for us as his creatures. All of that's true. The more we learn about the love of a man and a woman, the more, in a sense, we could glean the kind of, committed love that God has for us. And it seems even possible that the author of Song of Songs opened the door, at least just a crack, for that interpretation here in, I guess, what would be called the thesis or the concluding line of the poem in 8:6-7. Let's take a look at that quick. So here is the end of the fourth cycle with that refrain, and then we have these famous lines here. Set me as a seal on your heart, a seal on your arm. Doesn't that remind you of the Shema, by the way? For love is as strong as death, jealousy is fierce as the grave, and this love is the very flame of Yahweh. Now, isn't that interesting? And it says that this love is as strong, it's stronger than death. And you think about, wasn't it the love of God, the love of Jesus, which motivated him to die on behalf of his bride? And it was that same love which then conquered death and enables us to one day enjoy the marriage supper of the Lamb. And while all of that may be a legitimate secondary application for this book. In all honesty, a honest, straightforward, plain reading of the text will demonstrate that the Song of Songs is what it presents itself to be, love poetry. Okay, so all this is great, but you know what? The Song of Songs is love poetry, and that position, this strictly literal reading of the text of Song of Songs as a celebration of the divine gift of love, that arose in the 19th century, the 1800s, with the archaeological discoveries in Egypt of Egyptian love poetry. Here we are in Egypt, we got the pyramids, and this is an archaeologist, and he dug up a whole bunch of Egyptian love poetry, which looks a whole lot like the love poetry that we have here in Song of Songs. Let me show you a side-by-side. A love song, an Egyptian love song, and then here's Song of Songs chapter 4. So in a lot of these Egyptian love songs, they're going to use the wasif form as well, praising various elements of the body, and there's going to be speeches by the beloved and speeches by the lover. And all of it looks very similar to what we have in Song of Songs. Well, this realization that Song of Songs was really just utilizing a common literary form to describe love, that validates our straightforward reading of the text, that we're meant to understand the Song of Songs as what it presents itself to be, love poetry. It's as if the author started his poem, roses are red, violets are blue. Like we understand that motif of love poetry. Well, it is, on the one hand, shocking that God would devote an entire book of the Bible to celebrating the physical love relationship within marriage. But on the other hand, it's not that surprising, is it? I mean, God created us male and female, and both marriage and the love that exists within marriage are gifts from God. And this book, one of the 66 books of the Bible, it gives a kind of sacred dignity to human affections, God-given human affections, and it celebrates the delight and the desire and the pleasure which really flourish within a committed covenant of loyalty relationship that we call marriage. And you remember that the caution, the warning that we're given in each of these refrains, where it says, do not awaken love until it pleases, that is outside of the marriage covenant, but inside of the marriage covenant, love should be awake and alive, and it should flourish, as described here in the Song of Songs. Well, just because we've landed at a literal interpretation of the Song of Songs, that doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. Take a look at this chart depicting various interpretive trajectories for this very complicated book. Let's look at this first chart. So we have literal on the left, allegorical on the right. We looked at the Jewish allegorical interpretation and briefly at the Christian. The first question that we have to answer once we kind of land on the literal side is, how many characters are described here in the Song of Songs? The predominant view throughout history is that Song of Songs depicts two characters. Character one, Solomon. He's the man. And character two is the Shulamite. In chapter 6, it says that she is from the town of Shulam. She's a Shulamite. And it's about two characters. And this seems legitimate. I mean, the center section is all about Solomon's wedding. Isn't that the strongest evidence that one could ask for a depiction of a two-character drama between Solomon and the Shulamite? However, there is a legitimate argument that Solomon is not the hero of his own story. I mean, he's not exactly a shining example of marriage fidelity, is he? Let's jump to 1 Kings 11. What does it say here? Solomon loved one woman for his whole life. He was a one-woman kind of man. Well, no, that's not exactly what it says, is it? He loved many foreign women. As a matter of fact, he had 700 wives. These are probably uh, political marriages and 300 concubines. And what did these wives and concubines do? They turned away his heart, turned it after other gods, after Ashtaroth, Milcom. And the final evaluation of Solomon is that he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, this has led several scholars to ponder whether there may be three characters in this book of the Song of Solomon. And they're going to hypothesize a love triangle depiction here in this book. So what's going on with this love triangle? Well, the main lovers are the Shulamite, a shepherdess, and the shepherd, her shepherd boy, her lover, the shepherd boy. But then there's a third character, and that is Solomon. And Solomon is going to admire the Shulamite from afar, and then he's going to invite her into his harem. You know, come be one of my 700 wives or 300 concubines. Let's look at what may be that moment here in chapter 1, this invitation for the woman to join his harem. What does it say here? The king Solomon has brought me into his chambers. Could it be that this is describing her coming into the harem of Solomon? Ooh, this is not good because she loves the shepherd boy. What's going to happen next? Well, according to this love triangle reading, this initial dream describes the Shulamite escaping from Solomon's harem, and then she goes looking for her lover, and she finds him. And then here in the second dream, the lover comes to find her in the palace. Now, if all of this seems a little too far-fetched, a little too creative for you, I don't blame you. But you still may not feel comfortable with Solomon being the model of a committed love relationship. Let's write a whole book of the Bible about this. So where do you go from there? Well, some scholars have said, no, we are talking about a two-character drama. It is the shepherd and the shepherdess. However, whenever Solomon is described, what's really happening is the shepherd is described using royal images. So this marriage is really the marriage of the lowly shepherd boy, but in her eyes, in the eyes of the Shulamite, the shepherd boy, why, he is like Solomon to me. And what's going on here is that, you know, every husband should treat his wife like a queen, and every wife should treat her husband as a king. And that's very nice. I could understand that. Let's see, what's our next thing? We still, however, have one more question to ask and answer and speculate on with this literal reading of Song of Songs. Let me jump to that interpretive chart quickly. That is this last bar in gray. Is the Song of Songs cyclical or linear? Is there one storyline narrative which continues from the very beginning, chapter 1, all the way to chapter 8? Does the Song of Songs have a beginning and an end? Or is it simply a collection of a whole bunch of different love poems and they're all just brought together? Well, this is oftentimes called the anthology view. You know what an anthology is? It's just a collection of a whole bunch of different poems or short stories or something like that. Well, I don't think that Song of Songs is composed of a whole bunch of different poems written by different authors that was at some point brought together. There's way too much literary unity, shared vocabulary throughout this book. At the very first line, it says Song of Songs, right, which is Solomon's. It's singular. It is one song, not a collection of songs. However, I do sympathize with the position that argues that there is not a chronological sequence progressing from the first chapter to the last chapter. I think what makes sense to me is that we have repeated cycles of praise, plan, and meet, which take place again and again throughout the Song of Songs. And that's why it seems to me as if at the beginning of each of these cycles, we have the lovers initially being apart from one another, but every one of these cycles is going to end with the lovers together. And wouldn't it be kind of strange if there was one story which goes from the beginning into the end, but they get together 4 times throughout? No, it seems more like what we have is a cycle of seeking and finding and enjoying and anticipating one another. And I think what argues for this as well is the very last verse of the whole book. It ends with the chase continuing. Let's see that last verse in 8:14. Look at the last verse here. Let's go to chapter 8. So here's the fourth cycle. It ends here with this refrain. I'm going to scroll to the end, and it finishes with, the man calling out to his lover, and she says, "Make haste, my beloved, be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains, and chase me in the garden." Right? Like that's how the book ends. It doesn't seem to end with like a definitive conclusion, but the story continues on, and that seems to teach me that that love relationships within a marriage, the lovers should continually seek each other, and that process should never conclude. Well, if we can agree that at the base level meaning of the Song of Songs is love poetry between a man and a woman. However, our third person will say, how often does the Hebrew Bible operate on multiple levels of meaning? It does that all the time, doesn't it? So I would like to introduce you to what you may call a new allegorical interpretation of the book of the Song of Songs. Let's return to our chart here. Where are you, chart? So this is the wisdom allegorical interpretation. And take a look at what Tim Mackey has said about this. He likes to think of the Hebrew Bible like a big family quilt. And if you take one little square out of that quilt, if you take the Song of Songs out of the Hebrew Scriptures, and read it all by itself, it's love poetry. Can't deny it. Song of Songs is love poetry. But the moment you take Song of Songs and you put it back within the quilt of the Hebrew Bible, then you start noticing all these connections because the Song of Songs, it uses the same vocabulary and ideas that you find in Proverbs 1-9, that you find in the song or the Solomon story in the book of Kings, that you find in the Garden of Eden story. And then you realize that this book, it is in a scriptural context. So outside of the quilt, Song of Songs, it's about marriage. But inside the quilt, it's still about marriage, but it is contributing to a larger conversation, a conversation specifically between Proverbs 1-9 and the Garden of Eden. Now, Song of Songs, it takes place in a garden, doesn't it? And I think that its role in the quilt of the Hebrew scriptures is to present a what-if scenario. What if Adam and Eve got it right in the garden? What if Solomon got it right and he always ruled over his kingdom with the wisdom that he began ruling with? Now, the claim of this new allegorical interpretation is that the Song of Songs is going to deliberately echo both the Garden of Eden and the story of Solomon, but specifically Solomon's wisdom speeches in the prologue of the book of Proverbs. So the book of Proverbs has a whole bunch of, pithy little one-liners, right? But the first 9 chapters, the prologue of that book, are speeches from Solomon to his royal sons. He's saying, "Oh, my sons," and he's calling to them, and he says, "Rule." These are royal sons, so they're going to become kings one day. And he says, "Rule with wisdom," wisdom which is the fear of the Lord. And then he's going to personify wisdom as a woman, as Lady Wisdom. But let's take a look at the book of Proverbs and see that personification of wisdom as a woman. Let's go to Proverbs 8. Look at the first few verses. Does not wisdom call out? Think of the beloved, the woman calling out. Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads, at the gates, at the entrance of the portal, she cries out, "To you, O men, I call, and my cry is for the children of men. O simple ones, learn prudence," she says. "O fools, learn sense." Now let's go to chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She hewn her 7 pillars, and she slaughtered the beasts, mixed the wine, set her table. She sent out her young women to call from the highest place in the town, and she said, listen, everyone, whoever is simple, come, turn in here. Whoever lacks sense, come and eat my bread, says Lady Wisdom. Drink of the wine that I have mixed. Don't be simple anymore, but live in the way of insight. So what is the connection here? Those who will rule God's creation, rule his kingdom, they must pursue wisdom like they would pursue a woman. Now, do you see what where I'm going with this? And if you look at the descriptions of Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 1 through 9, and the descriptions of the beloved in the Song of Songs, you're going to see all kinds of connections just firing back and forth. There's this conversation in the quilt of the Hebrew Scriptures. Let's look at some of those connections between these two books. Made a chart here. So here on the left, we got the Song of Songs. On the right, we have Proverbs 1 through 9. And we see initially Lady Wisdom is calling out, right? She says, come, eat my bread. She cries aloud in the streets and in the markets, the Rachav. And we have in the Song of Songs, in chapter 3, this mysterious dream sequence, the woman is going to go out looking for her lover. And where's she going to look? In the streets, in the squares, in the ravats. The same description here found in Proverbs 9 and 1. And then it says here that if you seek wisdom like silver, then you will find the knowledge of God. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom. I love those who love me, who seek me and diligently find me. And this language of seeking and finding is all over the book of Song of Songs. And then what do? When you find wisdom, when you find her, what's next? Well, you should love her. Do not forsake her. She will keep you. Love her. Love wisdom, and she will guard you. I love those who love me. And then look at this language of physical embrace. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. And that's a critical line in it's its own little mini refrain in the book of Song of Songs. His left hand is under my head and his right hand embraces me. Same Hebrew word, havach, repeated twice. And what next? You embrace her and you, excuse me, you eat her fruit. My fruit is better than gold, says Lady Wisdom, even than fine gold. And consuming fruit, eating fruit is the primary metaphor for physical relations in the Song of Songs. Come and eat, come to my garden and eat its choicest fruits, the beloved says in Song of Songs 4:16. But you're not only eating, you're eating and you're drinking. Remember from Proverbs 9, she slaughtered her beasts, she mixed wine, set her table, and she says, come, eat of my bread, drink of my wine. And look at this language of wine and drinking from the Song of Songs. I drank my wine with my milk. Eat, friends, drink and be drunk with love. It says in 5 verse 1. And we'll just have one more description here. Look, I got 7 pages of parallels between these books. Let's see. I think this is 7:4. Here we are. In Proverbs 7:4, it says, say to wisdom, say to Lady Wisdom, you are my sister. Call insight your intimate friend. And this language of sister, I guess, was a Semitic term of affection between a husband and a wife. A husband would say, you are my sister. So that is parallel in both of these texts. So the question is, what if Solomon listened to his own advice and he pursued Lady Wisdom and not Lady Folly? We know the end of his reign, he pursued Lady Folly, right? But at the beginning, he was all about wisdom. He prayed for wisdom. And what was the result? His kingdom was characterized by wealth and abundance. Everyone reclined under their own fig tree in 1 Kings 4:25. and all of the nations came to Israel to hear the wisdom of the king of Israel. And they brought all their wealth and abundance and they set it at the feet of the king of Israel. That's 1 Kings 10:24 and 25. I mean, what was happening when Solomon ruled with wisdom, hand in hand with Lady Wisdom, was the recreation of the Garden of Eden. It was amazing. But then Solomon listened to the wrong woman, or in his case, women. And that is our link between the Solomon story and the Garden of Eden. You see, Adam was also commissioned to rule over creation, and he was given a helper. He was given a helper in the person of Eve. She's called an etzer. The only other person to be described with that term of helper is God himself. That is who Eve is to Adam, an etzer. And they were ruling together in a garden, naked and unashamed. I mean, does that sound like Solomon to you? Naked and unashamed in a garden, or Song of Songs to you? That's what it sounds like to me. But then, unfortunately, the helper Eve, she was deceived and she became Lady Folly. And then Adam, instead of ruling by God's wisdom, he decided to take wisdom for himself because he listened to Lady Folly. He ate the fruit from the wrong tree. Do you understand that metaphor now? He wanted to be wise in his own eyes instead of ruling with God's wisdom. So what we need, the book of Song of Songs teaches as it finds its place within the quilt of the Hebrew Scriptures, what we need is a new son of David and a new son of Solomon. Let's look at this in Isaiah. What do we need, author of Song of Songs? What we need is a new Solomon who will be filled with the spirit of wisdom and understanding. You will be filled with the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. This will enable him to rule with justice and with righteousness and with wisdom. And only then will we return to the garden.